Welcome back. Last week we were talking about the benefits of an employee survey, and we promised that this week we'd talk more about what to do with the output of an employee survey and how really important it is to action and follow up. So Rihanna, assume I'm a owner of a company and I've just finished doing my business survey. You've advised me how to set it all up. We've got all the data back. What do I do with it now?
Okay. So what I would do for you is I'd go back to in terms of looking at what the objective was in terms of why we want to do the survey.
Yeah.
I would look at the sections that we decided on, and then I would take that information and slice it and dice it.
Okay.
So let's say, for example, it was the communication section.
Right.
I'd go look at that. And obviously when you do your questions, it's got a rating of a scale.
Okay.
So from that, it will give an indication on each question that you had under communication, what the rating was. And if it's a low rating, then you know it's something that needs to be worked on.
Okay.
If it's a high rating, and that means it's a good rating, it doesn't mean you've got to go and be satisfied and sit on your laurels, as I say. It means, yes, it's good, keep it up, but also see where you can improve upon that. So we'll discuss each section and look at in terms of, from the questions, which one scored high, which scored low, and then discuss each of that.
So I suppose really what you're saying is it's as much about making sure you carry on doing what's working, as well as looking at what isn't working that needs remediation or fixing. And will I be able to see, I think you mentioned last week that you can slice and dice the data. So even in an area where perhaps the score is really good, I could see that perhaps that team, the score is really high, but could I see that perhaps this team over here, the score is slightly different, so that perhaps I had a mismatch between different teams?
Yes, so what we can do is you can have the overall data.
Okay.
And so that will give you, for the whole organization, how am I doing on communication? How am I doing on leadership, for example?
Yeah.
However, if you want to go and see per function, how each function is performing in relation to how it came out versus the whole organization, then we can go and slice and dice it per function. And you could find that some functions or departments, they're doing quite well on it in some areas, but need improvement in others. And others could be doing then less well than the others, but doing well on certain other sections. So then you can focus it down to what they need to do and what they need to implement.
Excellent. Could you also slice and dice it for different demographics? So say you didn't want to slice and dice it for a particular team, but perhaps a particular role across the organisation or a particular level of seniority. Could you slice and dice it in other ways, or is that really dependent on how you set up your survey as to which information you collect?
Exactly. So it depends in terms of how you set up that survey, and you need to ask yourself the question when you do set it up, why would you want the information in that format?
Sure.
What would it give you?
Sure.
If you want, for example, to look at management level in terms of management is saying and then what the rest of the employees are saying.
Okay.
So looking in terms of, again, what would the reason be that you'd want to see that division?
So it comes back to what we were talking about last week about why is it you're doing the survey and what information are you looking to get out of it, and then you structure the survey around the sort of data that you would like back and how you want to slice and dice it and how you want to use it.
Exactly. To use somebody in IT, for example, explained it to me this way, that if you're working with a database and you want to get information out of it, you need to put quality information in it to get quality information out. Put rubbish in, you get rubbish out.
Absolutely.
So it's exactly the same for a survey. It's important to sit down, look at the reason that you want the survey done, what is it you're looking for the survey to produce for you, and then you go and you develop your survey from that.
And so it's not just the questions on the survey, it's also what information, what information are you collecting about the people filling in the survey as well, in a way that still keeps it anonymous,
exactly,
but allows you to slice and dice it by different team members, different demographics, different locations,
exactly,
all sorts of things like that.
Yeah. So what you could, for example, you're not going to have name, you're not going to have gender on there.
Mm-hmm.
What you will have is, you could say, tick the box in terms of what department you are in or what function you are in. So are you in finance? Are you in procurement? Are you in HR?
Mm-hmm.
Etc.
Sure.
So you'd keep it, the information, as high level as possible, without being able to bring it down to an individual, to identify an individual. Because what you want to do is have people answer the questionnaire as honestly as possible. The moment they think they can be identified, they're going to give you what you want to hear. And I have been part of an organization, and I came in afterwards only.
Sure.
We were quite proud that they've done the survey and they scored so high in the survey.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, that's quite good. You know, this is an organization that is a good example in terms of they doing what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
However, after having worked in that organization for about 3 or 4 months, I started to get to know the employees. And I started walking around on the floor, and they were at a point where they trusted me as well. And I said, oh, I heard you guys did a survey and you scored so well on the survey. And they like smirked. And I said, and what's smirk for? And they said, we know why they wanted the survey. We just completed for the sake of completing it. Was I honest? No, I wasn't honest. I know what they wanted to see. So, and I spoke to quite a few number of employees with regard to that, and the reactions were similar. So the data that they got, you know, skewed data.
Oh, okay.
And again, management is sitting there thinking, wow, we've got this data, we're doing quite well. And how I picked up that it was not reflecting in terms of what they were telling me that the data gave, and they showed me the survey, was having been in the organization for 3 or 4 months only, I started picking up certain things that didn't corroborate in terms of what the survey was telling me.
Okay.
And then I thought, okay, I have built up trusting relationships with quite a number of employees. Let me speak to them on an individual basis, confidentially, in terms of, have they completed the survey? Did they do it honestly? And, you know, what was the reason if they did not do it honestly? And they just felt things were not going to change, even if they gave their feedback. And I asked, so what do you base that on? And they were like, because verbally we've already said we're unhappy about certain things and it's never changed. So by doing it on a piece of paper, it still wasn't going to change. And that's the reason. So you can actually see where, if you're doing a survey, it's quite important that the information you get is as honest as possible.
And you have to be seen to be doing something with it afterwards that
Very
actually
important.
is meaningful to the people that have filled in the survey.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're just going to lose faith in the organisation, and you're going to get skewed data like the instance that you showed.
Yeah.
But that's if you're doing an online survey. What about if you're doing focus groups? Because then you're actually getting the information directly from the person.
You're getting the information directly from the person, but similar to the survey, you're not sure how honest they are in terms of giving that feedback. Keep in mind, with focus groups, the person is even more exposed in that they are sitting there and they are telling you the feedback. Another way to do it is, and this is what I've advised, which I forgot to mention in the last video that we did, is that I advised employees who were chosen to be part of the focus group to go and speak to their peers.
Sure.
And get feedback from them.
Okay.
So that when you go back and you give feedback, you will say, I have asked for feedback from my peers, and this is the common theme that has come out of the
So
feedback.
you're not just giving your opinion, you're actually communicating
exactly. So they
general themes from everybody.
And they wouldn't know whether it's you just saying that and you
Sure.
don't really go get it, but you voicing your opinion, So
Yeah.
that's one of the ways that you can do it within a focus group also being identified as a person that said that. Because I know you're much more vulnerable and much more exposed.
And would you perhaps have somebody like you come in and run the focus group instead
Yes.
of it being somebody, say, from management or from HR?
That can be done as well.
Mm-hmm.
It has been done. However, HR will still insist to be there.
Okay.
And I guess it depends again on the company policy.
Mm-hmm.
And the CEO will always be there because they're giving him feedback. But having said what you said, Alison, they can still run focus groups where the management and HR does not have to be there.
Sure.
So you can have individuals come in and have sessions with employees within a group and get their feedback and then feedback back to management. It just depends in terms of how comfortable a small organization will be in doing that.
And that comes down to the climate and culture of the organisation,
Exactly.
doesn't it?
Exactly.
And that's something that we're going to be looking at next week, I believe.
Okay.
We're going to be interviewing somebody to talk about the importance of keeping a really open climate and culture within the organisation. So that especially for the smaller companies, especially when you are doing those focus groups, that you've engendered a feeling of trust, that people feel that they can give honest feedback. Otherwise you're just doing a checkbook exercise.
Exactly. And if people can see, yes, you've done this because you are interested in my feedback, and as an employee I can see that you're going to be doing something with that feedback, it makes me even more open to want to complete your following questionnaire that you send out.
So the survey's been done. I've got an idea of how we're going to slice and dice it. We've started looking at the information and what it's telling us. How do I interpret the information?
So that's where I will come in, or if it was your HR department doing it for you, that's where they'll sit down with you and say, here's the report in terms of how we sliced and diced the information, and this is how we interpret the information. So it will be in terms of, here is what the information has provided, and the next section of the report would be, this is what I would advise you to do in terms of the information that came out. And it could be simple things that have regular meetings with employees so that they are kept up to date. It could be that they feel there are no socials taking place. So look at in terms of how you can incorporate that within the workplace.
Certainly years ago when I used to work in corporate, we used to get the people survey results, and then each of the managers used to get the results for the wider organisation, and then it was broken down into the different departments, and then within the departments it was also broken down into the broader teams. They were quite large teams, so it was still fairly anonymous as to what the information was. And what was really important about that was they were sharing the information, and they were talking about the issues and talking to us on an individual basis. They were making it part of the regular weekly team meeting to keep on looking at that feedback, what it had told us and what we needed to change. And we'd work on it throughout the year, and then we'd see how it impacted the results the following year. So, I mean, as a business, who do I share the information with? Now I've got all the reports, the HR have been through it with me, and I know exactly what I'm looking at and how that's interpreted. So who do I share it with?
I personally think it should be shared with the whole organisation.
Okay.
And this was in South Africa when I worked for an organisation, and we did an employee survey for a big function. And what we did there was, when the information came back and we looked at in terms of, fine, we want to share this now, how do we do it? So if I talk about a big function, I'm talking about a department that had about 700 employees.
Sure.
And that again was split into sub-departments, but big enough still to be kept anonymous. And what the director of that division did was, he did what he called Address the Nation. And so he hired out the auditorium that they had at head office, had people come in for a light snack before the time, and then we went into the auditorium and he thanked people for completing the survey. And he said, I'd like to share with you the results of the survey. And he went through each of the sections. So this was the overall survey for
the whole organisation.
For the whole organisation. And he then gave examples in terms of where they would look at in terms of improving things, but was also quite honest in saying these areas came out and we cannot look at it for this year. It will have to go onto the agenda, but it's something we're going to look at for next year.
Okay.
So be honest with people if you cannot do things. Don't just let it slide thinking people are going to forget about it. So if you can tell them, yes, I noted you said this and this is what needs to be looked at, but it cannot be done this year, but we will look at it for next year. Keep that promise that you look at it then at the following year. They did similar to what you described and what the organisation did. That was then broken down into each sub-unit and then discussed with the teams, because the teams used to have weekly team meetings, but the meetings were more about targets that they need to achieve, how were they doing against the targets, etc.
Sure.
What they then did was they brought in an agenda point where they discussed how their team did against the overall results, and within the teams they discussed also in terms of, so what can we put together as a team, and this was noted that these are the issues, so tell us how you think it could be resolved. Again, it comes back to one of the previous discussions that we've had. You don't have to come up with a solution yourself. Ask your employees, because they've noted that that is an issue that needs to be addressed. So ask them, what would be the examples that you'd like to see for us to address this? And they help you to come up with a solution.
And you said that in that instance, the company was really clear about, well, these particular items, we can't address these till next year. For the items that a company is going to address, is there an ideal timeline between doing the survey, getting the results back, sharing with staff, and then starting to put actions in place before employees start to lose faith that anything's going to change?
Yeah. So I would say once you start the survey, let people know, obviously they know they've got X number of days to complete the survey. Let them know that you would get the feedback by X date, because you would have discussed that with the company or the individual that's doing the survey for you. And then also let them know by when you will be giving the feedback to them as an organisation as a whole. I would say those timelines should be as close to each other as possible.
Okay.
It comes back to what you said now earlier. You don't want them to lose faith in the process. And what's quite important is, let's say it's now the 1st of October. We say we're going to be doing the survey. Again, it depends on the size of your organisation. But let's say it's a small organisation. We give employees up until the end of October to complete the survey.
Yeah.
Which is quite long, but let's just say we give them up until the end of October. Again, depending on the size of your organisation. And with technology these days, it's going to be quite easy to interpret that information.
Yeah.
You're not going to have to physically sit there and input data. If it was done online, you'd pull that information together via technology and slice and dice it. So that should take you about, I would say, about a week to 10 days to look at that information and deliver the report. And it would be within a couple of days when you sit down with the director or the CEO of the company and discuss that report. And once it's got that information, maximum a week, I would give him maximum a week before he communicates it to the rest of the organization. And I would also say, make available to people to be able to see the report that came back if they want to look at the information. It should not be something that's confidential, that you hide away. It's people's information that went into that report. So they have every right to look at the information that's come back. Once they've got it, you action the points. Now again, depending on what needs to be actioned, that will have certain timelines attached to it. If people need to go on workshops, you need to look what's available, when can they go. But if there are things like implement a weekly team meeting, that's something you can action immediately. People need to see that progress is being made. What would be good, and this would keep the lines of communication open, you could on a quarterly basis, after you've identified what needs to be worked on and looked at the action steps, give feedback in terms of how are you progressing against what was identified. A lot of this sounds like hard work, a lot of effort, but for me, by putting this into the whole organization, implementing it, taking the time to do that, is what makes employees stay, because they can see the organization is listening to what they're saying, taking on board what they're saying, and they matter, so they would want to stay with an organization that look after them.
Of course. We've covered the two aspects last week and this. Are there any last pieces of advice, anything that you think we've missed, or do you think we've pretty much covered it at this point?
I think we've pretty much covered it. All I would like to say to business owners, don't be scared to do it. I know a lot of people say, but what if I do it and the feedback I get is negative? Yes, you're going to be disappointed in terms of the feedback that you got, because you would have known, okay, I expected that, but I didn't want to see it in black and white on paper. That's fine. At least you have a starting point to know, where can I start? What do I need to do to improve? And things can only get better. If you do not do a survey, it's like being in the dark, having no direction, with nowhere to go. So my advice would be, jump in and do it. For me, you have nothing to lose but only to gain.
Well, that's been our toe in the water of employee surveys. One thing that occurs to me, if people want to look at any best practice, is there any information? We've mentioned the ACAS website before. Could they get information there?
They can get information there. There's also like people management.
Okay.
They do, I don't know if they still send out journals, but they do have an online portal.
Excellent.
That you can go to.
That's peoplemanagement.com.
Peoplemanagement.com. And people write a lot of articles on retention strategies, motivation strategies, and you'll find underlying and underpinning this would be surveys, because that's where you get your information from.
Brilliant. We've kept it quite brief on the employee survey. You could start digressing into all those areas that Rihanna just mentioned. But we're going to make those into different topics altogether. So I hope it's given you food for thought around employee surveys. As always, if you have any questions, by all means post them against the video, or have a look and drop into our Prosper Through People group, where you have like-minded people that you can ask questions, find out what people are doing. And of course you can ask us as well, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. We hope you found that useful, and we look forward to speaking to you again really soon. Bye.
Bye.